Hi, this is Rick Fritzmeyer with Multiply 417. Thanks for joining me again this week. As you may recall, we're in the middle of a 4-part tip talking about major donors and major givers. Last week we talked kind of in part 1 about the first couple of stages in the pipeline. We tend to use different words a little bit. In the most common pipeline stage, we have find, win, keep, lift. That's actually been adjusted now to talk about find, cultivate, win, keep, and lift. And if you get even deeper into the weeds, lots of times people will talk about find as the process of identification and qualification, which then leads to the cultivation stage and then the win stage or solicitation stage, which I know we don't tend to like that word. Then, of course, keep, and then, of course, lift. So we want to move on a little bit, but just 2 more reminders about last week's time. We talked about in the identification process, one of the methods, kind of one of the formulas that you might use, especially when you're talking about internal identification. So again, this is about major givers. So we're probably talking about folks that maybe have already been giving, not exclusively, because there's certainly a need to do some identification work outside of your database. But inside of your database, if you're trying to take a look and do some assessment about people that might be ready for a major gift ask or the reality, a major gift lift, meaning they're already a major giver at some level, but you want to move them to another degree, another amount, then sometimes we use what's known as the RFM assessment system. That stands for the recency, the frequency, and the monetary value. And we covered that quite a bit more last week, so I won't do much more than just say that by way of review, but did just want to remind you about that. So now we've kind of done our identification work. We've done some of our qualification work. So now it's time to talk about cultivation, which we talked a little bit about last week. But this week, I want to talk really about 2 more aspects of cultivation. And the first of them is I want to talk with you about how do you tell your story. We know that whenever we're working with a donor, with a partner, a prospective partner, we want to share the stories. We've got incredible stories as nonprofits, as faith-based nonprofits, as Youth for Christ chapters. And we want to tell them those stories. But I want to challenge you, and this is covered in the written part of the text, the tip as well. But I want to challenge you to think about, to practice even, thinking about the same story, but being told in different ways, different angles. Angle sounds like a bad word. I don't mean that way yet. A different perspective, a different passion being told about the story. In the written tip, I mentioned, what if you told a typical story about a kid coming to know Christ, but you told it from the perspective of a donor, a partner, that had given a gift the previous year, and they knew, because now of the follow-up and now the next year's banquet, that gift very much had a distinct part in that kid's story being told. So yeah, you can just tell, and again, the written tip, you can just tell Juan's story about how he came to know the Lord. You can tell the story from the perspective of the staff person or the volunteer. You could tell that story from the perspective of someone in juvenile hall watching all this go on. In the written tip, I kind of take the angle of telling that story from the perspective of a donor. Now, why? That's the real point of all this passion storytelling. Well, because in our 3-story engagement, in our 3-story development plan, we talk about our passion, their passion, and then when there's a match, that's God's passion, because God's passion is for us to work together with the body to see, in our case, young people come to know Christ. In this case, though, we just know that when we're able to share our passions and we find out and learn their passions, when some of those are the same for kingdom advancement, then that's God's passion, and that's an incredible, incredible thing. So we want to be able to tell our story in ways that might probe, find, fish for, again, not the best word there, look out for different passions that may stroke the fire, that may stroke the flame of our partner's passion for kingdom advancement. So just think about that. Try to think about the same essential story. By the way, we're not making anything up here. You're not adding on to anything that's not real. You're just learning to tell essentially the same story, but highlight different passion. Now, think about this. You already probably do that in some ways anyhow, because you go to a banquet. Let's just use an old school style banquet. I realize there's not as many of them anymore, or even a current Be the Story. We tell different stories because we'll tell a story from a campus life staff person, or we'll tell a story from a JJM kid, or we'll tell a story from a parent life mom, or a volunteer, or a staff, or the kid. Those are some different aspects, some different ways to tell the story. And a part of it, whether we've thought about it or not, a part of it is because it speaks out to different kinds of passions that our donors or partners may have. So now I'm wanting you to drill back down and think about that even more. I want you to become even more intentional to think about the same story being told with at least 3 or 4 different passions. Now, not 3 or 4 all at one time, but there's the story of, I'm just going to stick with Juan, the story of Juan with being told this way that primarily highlights this passion. But then there's the story of Juan again, but now told primarily highlighting this passion, being different. Passion could mean the way the story is, the ministry. I mean, again, you get the idea behind how I'm using the word passion here. But I want you to exercise, to practice, to become versed at telling the same story, but highlighting different passions. Then here becomes the key. Now I want you to start thinking about how you tell that story and which passion depending upon your audience. So yes, you are trying to find out, you're trying to inquire, you're trying to be inquisitive and telling that story different ways, thinking like, well, you know what? I think if I tell that story to Rick Fritzmeyer, he's going to want to hear the story from this perspective. Where if I told the story to his 38-year-old daughter, yeah, that's right, I got daughters older than a lot of you, that I might want to tell the story this way instead. Not making anything up, not being manipulative, just being wise and a good steward of the resources you have in sharing different stories. So again, we're in the process of cultivation. We're trying to cultivate this relationship. We're trying to do good engagement. And a part of that is as we share our passions, we're learning their passions. And a part of how we want to learn their passions is by learning to tell our stories with different flavors, different seasoning of passions. Okay, so that's one aspect of Cultivate I wanted to talk about this week. The other one real quickly then is, I think I've mentioned this before, is engagement. Effective engagement in 3-story development cannot be a monologue. It must be a dialogue. Think about it back to 3-story proper. It's not a monologue. It's absolutely a dialogue. We're talking in the form of questions. We're using a Socratic style every bit as much as we're ever using a monologue. Because we honestly do care, we honestly do want to know, we honestly do want to learn, and for the sake of donors and prospects, one of the ways that we learn better about them, just about them in general, because we want to care for them, just about ways we can minister them, but we also learn about, again, what might be their passions. And I want to encourage you in the process of some of your dialogue, that some of your dialogue needs to be surveys, questionnaires. You call them whatever you like, make them feel good for you. But I used one several times over the course of my years as executive director. I called it the 3Q survey. It was just 3 simple questions. Actually, I'm pretty sure I got this from way back in the day with Barry McLeish. 3 questions. I literally would call up a donor and say, hey, I got 3 quick questions, but I would like to come by and ask you the questions. Hey, this is only a 15-minute appointment. This does not take very long. A lot of them will give you, they don't want to meet for 15 minutes. In fact, it's almost like, no, trust me, 15 minutes, I promise. And then you'll have to then flex. If they just insist that you stick around for coffee, obviously you're not going to turn them down. But try to be pretty faithful. If you promise them a 15-minute appointment in this regard, mostly stick to it, okay? But 3 questions, here they are. Why do you continue giving to YFC? Significant question there. And a different question than why do you give? The answers could somewhat come back the same, but I want you to think about the why do you continue to give. It potentially will produce a little deeper answer than just why do you give, okay? The second question is, what stories, now here would be the way we would tend to say it, what stories have the most impact on you? I get that question. I don't think the person on the street is going to respond to that word impact like we would think that they could. So, what stories do you enjoy the most? What stories bring a tear to your eye? What stories make you most excited about your investment in YFC? That would be the second question. And then listen for the answers. Take notes, either in your head if you're young, or on paper if you're old, or whatever. But that's the second question. The third question then is always a fun one. And most of the time, I'll tell you right now, you probably won't get much of an answer. It's okay. But if you could change one thing in all of YFC that you know about, and you had total authority, total power to make one change, what would that change be? and then listen for their answers, maybe interact with it on some, maybe get clarification on it. But I want to encourage you that those 3 questions, and I'm sure there's 3 you can replace them with, they're equally every bit as good. Don't get me wrong, those aren't 3 magical questions, but they're 3 that have been thought through quite a bit and used quite a bit. Those 3 questions will give you some, first of all, an incredible growth in your relationship and knowledge with this person. And again, I don't mean manipulative. I mean honestly of good heart and good sense of ministry. But they will give you insights. You will know quite a bit more about ways you can communicate with them, things that they may or may not be more interested in the future, ways that you bless them already and minister them already because of their involvement. You'll just grow hugely in your relationship with them in the most honorable ways possible. But also as a part of that honorable way is in helping them to become even more effective partners as the Holy Spirit would lead. So a lot said there about the process of cultivate and using stories with passion seasoning, and then also using surveys. Hope that helps. Next week will be part 3. We'll move on to win. We'll move on to solicitation and talking about ways to make that ask for a larger gift perhaps than normal, or a larger gift perhaps than what they've been getting. Blessings, love you, take care. This is Rick with Multiply 417. Please give me a call or email me sometime if I can help you in any way possible. Take care. Blessings.